Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Ravi. And it indeed is a pleasure to be introducing the speaker for today, Faye D'Souza. Faye is a multi-award winning journalist who has altered the way in which news is covered on Indian television. She focuses the audience's attention on issues that impact citizens rather than on fueling emotions of partisan debates. Faye's calm, research style of hosting news programs prioritizes information over opinion. Her focus on accountability of the government, safety of women, safety of children, education, urban development have resulted in several policy changes that prove that good journalism can bring about changes and improvements in status quo. For all those who are familiar with Faye D'Souza, she is the journalist of the millennials, young, fresh, and brutally honest. Faye was the youngest woman journalist to have led a news channel as its executive editor. Post her exit from television, Faye has begun her entrepreneurial journey and she will soon be launching her own digital news platform targeting the young and the urban Indian audience. Faye is from Bengaluru. She has completed her journalism from Mount Carmel College. And soon after that, she joined CNBC TV 18 in the year 2004. She slowly started reporting on finance aspects such as mutual funds, insurance, and consumer issues. In 2008, she moved to ET Now, and she was the editor of Personal Finance. In 2017, she was the project lead when Mirror Now was launched. And as the editor, she put together the design for the editorial content and also the team for Mirror Now. Faye, in her new journey as entrepreneur in the digital news era, she aims to deliver the information without opinion and without any outrage so as to restore the dignity to the profession of news, not just to the anchor, but also to the audience. A warm welcome to you, Faye.
Thank you. Very kind of you to call me young. I'm not as young as I was when I started this journey, but I'll still take it. I'll take what I get. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor to be here. I, of course, would have loved to be there in person. Bangalore is my favorite place in the whole country. And whenever I can't travel to Bangalore, I'm always very disappointed. So I'm happy to be here today and to be able to speak to all of you about news. That was the that was the topic that I was asked to speak about. I also have another window open so that I can take questions in case in case we are taking questions today. You can just pop it into the chat window at the bottom of your Zoom, and we can make this more of an interactive conversation rather than just me droning on, from my living room. So talking about what's going on with news. And it's interesting that most of the people I speak to either tell me that they don't watch news anymore, they don't watch television anymore. And those who do seem really disappointed with what they see. There are a large number of people who just generally feel that there is no service being rendered by television news because you don't get to hear all of the news. You just get to hear people yelling at each other. You just people you're not even sure who to trust anymore, what to trust. There is a sense that that they're not being entirely honest with you, that they're only taking one side of the view. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how did it get to this point? How did Indian media get to where it is today? And the answer, which most businessmen will agree with, is invariably in the business model, if you consider it. So India has over 400 news channels right now, 400 news channels, counting also all of the regional news, business news, all of these business news in regional language, all of that stuff, then it comes up to about 400 channels. And the total television business of all television channels is worth more than 2,200 crore rupees. And yet somehow the audience of television channels feels that they're not getting a service of any kind of any work. The reasons for that are obviously a sort of shrinking of the business. Several things have happened over the last few years that has resulted in the business shrinking. Television is an extremely expensive business to run. You need studios, you need satellite space, you need distribution, and to make matters worse, more and more people are moving onto the internet, not renewing their Tata Sky or their Dish TV memberships. They're just going straight onto Netflix and Amazon, which makes it more and more difficult then to find new customers. Also, with the new TRI guidelines, where you only subscribe to the channels that you want to watch, it becomes difficult then for someone to walk in on your channel if they haven't already subscribed to it. So this makes the business of running a television news channel very expensive. Also, with a market that's constantly shrinking, even before the pandemic, India's economy was not in a great place. And most businesses cut advertising. It's the first thing, the marketing budget is the first thing to go. Television channels and news channels and even newspapers are entirely dependent on advertising for their revenue. There is no other route of revenue. It's mostly advertising. There is a trickle that comes in from subscription, but it's not much to even write home about. What happens when all of your revenue is dependent on advertising? Advertisers in India actually don't care about the quality of the journalism that's being put out, or whether it is abrasive or disrespectful to women, or even, completely not entirely fact. Advertisers only look at the TRP number. And the top 3 TRP numbers over a period of, say, 6 months, these are the ones who get the advertising revenue. So as a result, we've sort of built for a system where the only thing people look for is TRPs. There's no accountability, there's no commitment to the truth, there's no commitment to the rules of journalism, because all they care about is delivering one night's TRP and making sure that they are on top for that one night. And I'll give you an example of this. When this whole TRP scam had broken out, I spoke to someone who told me it's interesting that the numbers are actually released for all channels. So your GEC channels, which do your Saas Bahu, so your Sony TV or Zee or whoever else are doing serials, or the sports channels, or all of these channels get the same TRP numbers from the same agency every week. But it is only television where there is this beating of a drum of I'm number one, you are number one, I'm a little above this is the graphic, this is, my bar is a little higher than your bar. Only in television news does it happen. It doesn't happen on any other type of news channel. And incidentally, this is the only type of news channel that's meant to be driven by ethics, and the only one that seems to have compromised most of its ethics, because BARC actually has a rule that says you are not supposed to misrepresent the numbers, but most of them do by cutting it in a way that makes them look like they're number one. They'll say, okay, from only the top 5 cities, ages 25 to this, only the males, only SSCA, we are number one, which they're not allowed to do, but all of them do it. And they sacrifice ethics, which is odd for me because nobody else is doing it. The sports channels are not doing it. The Saas Bahu channels are not doing it. Nobody else is doing it. Only the news channels are doing it. And that sort of indicates the kind of desperation that, we're looking at. When you have a system which is completely looking for TRPs and nothing else, that's the only carrot that they're chasing. What is the problem there? The problem there is that journalism gets sacrificed. And when journalism gets sacrificed, you have only entertainment. I want to give you a couple of examples, right? So the rules of journalism fundamentally, the first one, which they teach you in the first day of college or school, wherever you study your journalism, is news has to be fact and not fiction. It has to necessarily fall in the non-fiction category. That's the first thing that tends to suffer. The second thing is fairness and impartiality and independence, right? So You have to be able to report a story without fear or favor, without being afraid of anybody or without playing favors to anybody else. That's the second thing that you have to follow. And finally, humanity and accountability. Um, Truth. Let's start with truth and accuracy. I want to give you an example. I'll give you a non-political example because a lot of times people tend to, turn all conversations into political conversations. I'll give you a non-political example of how truth and accuracy has been sacrificed at the altar of TRPs. I remember the day when we got the news that the actor Sridevi had passed away. She was in Dubai. We got the news in the middle of the night, about 2 or 3 in the morning. And the next day we got to office, and I remember spending the whole day trying to figure out any information which the other channels were running. They were running channels on, they were running information saying that, she might have been murdered, there would have been foul play. Some of had actually gone as far as alleging that her husband had something to do with it. And we all remember those, those graphics of this was the width of the bathtub, and, this is her height, how would she have fit in it? All of those ghastly things that were said. I sent a local journalist to actually fetch the postmortem report in Dubai. We sent local journalists to the embassy to find out, the High Commission to find out what was going on. We could find no evidence whatsoever of foul play. All it said is accidental death by drowning. That is it. It was absolutely no evidence. And we had decided that night, I decided that we will not do the story of how she died. And it's okay if nobody watches. And incidentally, nobody watched that night because I was the only one on television not doing the exciting story of what might have happened and how she might have died and who's covering it up, because we had no evidence. And I remember a colleague had come up to me and asked me, what if it turns out 2 days later that she had in fact been, been murdered? And I said, dude, if it does turn out 2 days later that she'd been murdered, we will report it then. But our job is not to report it now. Our job is to report what has happened and not to speculate on what might have happened, which is okay to do at a dinner table. It's okay to do at a chai shop and, sit around with your friends and figure out what might have happened. It's not okay for journalists to do. We're not supposed to be speculating on what might have happened. We're supposed to only be reporting what has happened. That night, a bunch of television channels went out and reported or discussed and speculated that she might have been murdered. It has been over 2 years since. Maybe 3 actually now. Not one of them has retracted, apologized to her family for the distress that they brought her, apologized to her fans for just ruining the legacy of someone who had worked her entire life. There's just zero accountability in what they needed to do. So today, if I say Sridevi, instead of thinking about Chalbaz and Hawaii and all of the other amazing work that she's done, you will think bathtub. Because that legacy has been tarnished by news channels for one night. And why did they do it? What could have possibly been their motive? Because there's no political play here. What could possibly have been their motive to do something so ghastly? One night's TRPs. For that one night, that's all they got. One night's TRPs, and the next day they were on to something else. And they moved on from there and never looked back. They broke the rules of truth and accuracy. They broke the rules of accountability because they didn't apologize. They didn't apologize to their viewers for misleading them. They didn't apologize to those they hurt with the story. They just walked away. So what they're putting out at this point is completely fiction. And through that one story, they've lost the trust of their viewers. And now how do you know who you can trust anymore? The other point that I wanted to bring up was, of course, independence and fairness and impartiality. Like I said, the biggest advertiser, the biggest source of revenue for television news channels is advertisements. And in a market that is this weak, the biggest source of advertisements are governments, state and center. The central government between 2014 and 2019 in its first term spent 5,700 crore rupees on advertisements alone. 5,700 crore rupees. Now, for a starving industry that is starving, that is a godsend. And out of that 5,700, incidentally, 2,600 crore rupees was spent on television. 2,370 crore rupees was spent on print media. The Times of India got 217 crore rupees. The Dainik Jagran got 100 crore rupees. Now, do we expect these channels and these newspapers to bite the hand that feeds them? I mean, how often have you woken up in the morning, opened your newspaper, and seen that the entire front page is a political ad for either a state government or the central government with big pictures of politicians, chief ministers, prime ministers, home ministers on it? That pays for the newspaper. So the important thing to understand in this relationship is that the customer for that kind of news is the advertiser, not you. The viewer is not the customer for television news. The viewer is the commodity. It is your attention span that they are harnessing, packaging, and selling to somebody else. So the sort of harsh, analogy that I use to explain to people how this works is that your relationship with your TV news channel is the relationship that chicken has with real good chicken or with Venki's chicken. You are the commodity that they chop up and put in a nice box and sell to somebody else. You are not the customer. So they have no interest in what is good for you. They have no interest in being accountable to you. You don't matter as long as you are watching for more than 1 minute at a time. And that's when you get registered as, as a viewer. And the final tenet of journalism, so obviously, if I were to just dump facts on you, I would be Wikipedia, I would be an encyclopedia. What is the difference between an encyclopedia and journalism? Is to take those facts, put it in context, and report it with humanity and accountability. Right? So, to pick facts that are important to you, stories that you need to know about that make you better citizens, make you better informed, put you in a better position to make decisions, and stories that are led with humanity for the weakest in society. But how often have we seen these channels report what is happening from rural India, from farmers? I think a glaring example was when right through the lockdown last year, when there was a massive crisis in a way that we had never seen before, where people were actually walking hundreds of kilometers back to their homes. A lot of the television channels were missing because their attention was commanded by the people who pay their bills, not by the people who really need the attention of the media, not by the people who really need the information, which is you as the customer. So effectively, we've reached a point now where there's no truth and accuracy. There's no independence without fear and favor. And of course, there's no fairness and impartiality. There's no humanity. So effectively, there is no news. There's no journalism. What you have every day is just entertainment. And of course, there is the tricky question, which the government is trying to answer at this point, about accountability. Traditionally, you cannot have journalism regulated by the government, because as soon as that power is given to the government, any government at all will use that power to crush whoever is asking questions of that government, which is why journalism had to always have accountability, where they apologize for their own mistakes so that the audience realizes that there was an error made, that there's a self-regulatory system. They put together a panel of senior people, retired judges, and they become accountable to that panel. That is how journalism is normally regulated, and we're seeing a departure from that. And quite honestly, not a departure that the media has not brought upon itself. On one hand, this regulation is now being brought on online media, whereas television media that really needs to be looked into is apparently self-regulated, but rarely responds to the notices sent by its self-regulation, rarely apologizes for its own mistakes. So almost every basic tenet of journalism has been broken by the television media groups right now. because they're serving only one master and they're fighting for their basic survival. I see independent journalists and independent media being uh, the spark or the change at this point that will allow for some honest reporting to happen for a couple of reasons. One, when we function off the internet, our costs are not so high. So we're not as dependent on advertising for basic survival. We're not big, massive companies that need to churn out a lot of money. So that makes it easier for us to survive. Also, a lot of journalists who exited mainstream media have now started independent news outlets with the support of the audience. So the audience pays for the content, the audience pays for the journalism, audience supports the journalist, and that's how the work happens, as opposed to getting money from an advertiser who you can never ask a question to in the future. I mean, a great example also is Patanjali and Baba Ramdev. Mr. Ramdev, who to me is a businessman who is also very good at yoga, was among the top advertisers for most news channels in the 2 years running up to the pandemic. So when he launched a product that had almost zero science behind it, claiming that it can cure COVID, everybody just carried it without asking a single question. Whereas in the rest of the world, there were clinical trials going on, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Here, he just launched a product and said, I can now cure COVID, and all of the news channels just carried it. And what happens when news channels carry it? People go out and buy this product, assuming that they can now protect themselves from COVID because they bought this product from Patanjali, maybe giving themselves COVID and giving their families COVID in the process, because now they're not taking adequate precautions, thinking that they have protected themselves. So the danger of advertiser-funded journalism has now become extremely real. And that I see as a major problem as to what is wrong with the news. I'm idealistic, I always was. I hope that, through independent journalism, through smaller outlets, we can create a sort of tapestry across India of journalists who are covering various aspects. Like there are currently websites that only cover Dalit issues that are run by members of the Dalit community. There are websites that only cover rural India and farmer issues. There's one website that only covers Coimbatore, which I think is amazing, because what that does is that gives, it sort of gives agency back to communities to cover their own issues. And so as a viewer of news or a consumer of news, you have the ability to choose who you want to support, choose who you want to trust, and support them and make sure that you're always getting honest journalism, as opposed to watching television where someone is yelling at you all the time and feeling some way that you're being cheated. And I know this for sure, that the Indian audience is extremely intelligent. And what television news does night after night is insult their intelligence and assume that they don't know better. And I think that is, extremely unfair. Of course, now that I'm an entrepreneur, I also take this opportunity to talk about what I'm doing. My aim is to bring the dignity back to news, to bring good health back to news. When I was growing up, we had 1 hour of news on Doordarshan every night, or half an hour of news. And my dad would call me, make me sit on the sofa and watch it every night, because the language was clean and wholesome. We could learn English from it, because it was important to know what was going on around you, because it told you what was going on in your city, in your state, in your country, internationally, with science and technology, with sports. That's how news function. My aim is to bring that back, that wholesomeness to news, where parents can tell their children to watch news, where there is dignity for the person delivering the news, dignity for the people that are being interviewed, and dignity for the audience as well. News at the end of the day is not meant to be entertaining. It's meant to be boring. It's meant to be deadpan. It's meant to be vegetables that you have to have with your meal in order to stay healthy and to stay informed. The moment we start making news into butter chicken, we get into that slippery slope which has led us to where we are today. Competing with like entertainment shows, trying to get higher TRPs, trying to be more interesting. My aim is to bring the dignity back, where we deliver just the information. No opinion, no outrage, no telling you whether to be angry or to be upset or this is bad or this is good, nothing. I will give you all the information. You are intelligent enough to figure it out for yourself. Discussions will only be had with people who can offer expertise. So people who are either educationally qualified or professionally qualified to comment on an issue will help us understand it better. No opinion. Interviews will only be done with those people who can offer us lived experience about something. Only a transgender person can tell me what it is like to be a transgender person in India. So interviews will only be had with those people. So the idea is, especially for our younger generation who are not reading the papers, who are not watching TV because they don't trust it, and quite rightly, not reading the papers because it's inconvenient, who are only on their phones all the time. I want to create a system that delivers the news to them in a way that they can tell the difference, that this is news and everything else is not. This is what news is supposed to sound like. This is what news is supposed to feel like when I listen to it. That dignity, that wholesomeness. So that, and if we consider the fact that the largest population in our country is of young people who know more about European football right now than they know about what's going on in their own country, we're doing a massive disservice to them, and by extension to the democracy. My aim right now is to create an organization that just informs people and doesn't tell you how to feel about it. You make up your mind. I will only give you the information. That's, that's the purpose. My appeal, of course, to everyone is find journalists that you believe in, and find ways to support them financially, forward their videos, read their articles. All of these things matter because we're going up against, the big guys, the Times groups and things like that. So find ways to support journalists who really matter. I'm going to stop there because I can see that we have a bunch of questions that have come in. Should I begin to answer the questions? Does anybody want to moderate that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. News in India means political news. Jasbir Duri. Unfortunately, that is what has happened, and that's largely happened because political parties spend money on news, and it's the cheapest form of journalism to do, the easiest form of journalism to do is to put two opposing parties on a channel and get them to yell at each other for 1 hour. It costs almost nothing to do that because you don't have to put in time in research. You don't have to do a hard reporting on the ground. You don't have to do anything. You just sit in your studio and make two people yell at each other for an hour and you're done. It also, creates the most masala on television because it's confrontational, which is why it has become so political and why the real issues are not being reported. I mean, if you ask me right now, we've lost an inordinate number of jobs in India in the last 2 years, pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, of which women have lost more jobs than men. Children across 249 million children, according to the UN, in India have been cut off from education in the last year because they don't have access to the internet. And so they can't study online. Right to education is a fundamental right in our country. Nobody's talking about it. Children who have not gone to school have not been given their midday meals. And so their access to nutrition has come down, and we've actually received a massive setback of nearly a decade, maybe more, in our aim to feed children in our country and make sure we don't have children. We have the largest population of hungry children in this country. Girls are likely to have been married off in the last 1 year in child marriage because the parents could no longer afford to keep them at home. It was easier to get them married. These are the real issues in our country, but nobody's talking about them because they're not sexy to put on television. And no political party is interested in solving these problems, state or center. And so nobody wants to talk about it because it's inconvenient and these are long-term problems. Independent media also requires money. How do they earn? This is Krupuswamy. Independent media, yes, requires money, less than what television needs in order to survive. The largest source for most independent media is the viewer or the reader themselves, either by selling memberships or by soliciting contributions from the readers themselves. That's how independent media is making money right now. And you'll see right now, everybody from the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to the Hindu in Chennai, everybody's asking you to pay for the content. so that they no longer have to be dependent on advertisers, and advertisers would no longer will call the shots on what gets covered and what doesn't get covered. So that's also the route that Indian media is taking. Um, so we have Bharat Ben. Thank you so much for your comment. I think all TV channels seem to be connected with the government or against it. News seems to be all noise. Is there any independent news channels today? But unfortunately, there are no independent news channels because it costs upwards of 200 crore rupees to run a news channel. And no independent journalist can raise that kind of money because no investor is putting that kind of investment into news anymore. You have to be linked to the government in some way to raise those investments. In fact, those who are questioning government within television are being asked to leave or losing their jobs. Channels that consistently question the government, their brands are being told not to advertise on those channels. I have it from a pretty good source that brand companies that advertise on channels that take on issues with the government get calls from ministries saying, take off your advertisement from this channel, making it more and more difficult for those channels to survive. One of those things you would have seen that happens very regularly are conclaves. You will see a lot of these TV channels do these big conclaves. Conclaves are done simply as money spinners. When you have a conclave, you can raise between 12 to 20 crore rupees depending on advertising, depending on how big your conclave is, because you get big advertisers at that time. Big advertisers only come if the conclave is being attended by big politicians. So cabinet minister in the morning, home minister at night, and several cabinet ministers during the day, and several other very high-ranked officials through the course of the 2-3 days. That's how advertisers come in, because then PSUs will advertise. But if you regularly question government, ministers and bureaucrats and officials will boycott your conclave. And if you don't have these guys attending and speaking at your event, nobody will advertise. If you don't have advertisement, you cannot make your quarterly numbers. And so as a result, you have this chakravyuh that these channels are stuck in. There's no way out. They have to keep firing journalists who ask questions. They have to keep playing to their political masters, because otherwise they simply cannot survive. The business model is broken. It no longer serves the interest of the viewer. Do you agree not much efforts or money is being spent on creating content? Jaspreet Dori. Creating content in what way? I see one of the problems again with television is that because money is so tight, they are all thinning down their teams. Remember, it's a 24/7 monster that needs to be fed constantly. You constantly have to have breaking news. You constantly have to have people talking. So as a result, they've actually eliminated all the hard research, the time that people can spend, the thickness of the teams. And now you have very thin teams of very tired people working in television. I remember when I joined the industry, I would get 2 weeks to 2 months to work on one story. And I was working, we were investigating crime at that time, economic crime. There was a story that I did out of Chennai on which I spent 2 months, and nobody, I was only reporting to my editor and nobody else knew where I was. That is a luxury right now because nobody has that kind of time. You have to feed the monster constantly. So every reporter is asked to deliver something by the end of the day, which means that they're standing in front of something and pointing and saying, oh, behind me is the chief minister's house in which there is a meeting happening. And that person will stand there and do what they call live hits at 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock, 11:30, 12 o'clock, 12:30, and this goes on all day. So this reporter has not budged from that place all day because that monster needs to be fed. Unfortunately, that poor person will not even have the time to eat something or go use a washroom because she's standing there all day. When is the time to actually find out what's going on in the meeting? To meet your sources, to do investigation, to read documents, to do research. There is no time, which is why it seems so shallow to you, which is why it doesn't feel like real, proper journalism. I hope that answers the question. I sort of assumed that, that's what you asked. do you have to pay panelists on a TV debate? So I'd actually taken a call when I was on television that we wouldn't pay panelists for TV debates. And those people who said, no, we can't give you our time, we said, okay, no problem. And we didn't use them. From the time I've become an independent journalist, I haven't paid anybody at all, including myself, for many months. But I found quite pleasantly that nobody has asked me for money, since I left television. There was a time when during elections, when you bring in senior journalists and you contract them for a certain period, there is a payment that needs to be paid, but that is a professional payment because it's like writing a column on a regular basis for a newspaper for which you receive money, which you receive payment per word. That's how that works. But yes, there are many panelists who get paid for their time, and there's an ethical gray area there because if I'm paying you for your time, can I also tell you what to say? And that's the gray area between how that works and paying for the time. A question has been asked and raised several times. Right now, I don't pay anybody to speak to me. Sometimes I have to pay my friends though. Let me see. Okay, a couple of people have joined. Mr. Ravi Kumar's daughter, who is a friend of mine. Good evening. Suman Bayankar, thank you for joining. Madhu, thank you for joining. Venkatraman S. I moved away from TV news a year ago. I've switched newspapers to find a balanced one. Do you agree print media is equally bad? You thank you. So here's the interesting thing. I read still 5 newspapers every morning, which I've realized is a environmentally terrible habit, but it's just a habit right now. So I'm still trying to break out of it. But when you pick up many newspapers and you see the headlines being written, you'll see how some newspapers sort of tilt the headlines, and there's a knack to writing the headline to make it seem like something. So for example, a great example, I'll let you do it because it's in today's papers and it'll also be in tomorrow's papers, is the government passing this the government of National Capital Territory, which is basically stripping the powers from the Delhi government and giving it to the LG. Some papers have said it's within the framework of the Constitution. Some papers have said it's not within the framework of the Constitution. These are two opposite ends of the debate. And if you look at the headlines side by side, you will be able to tell which side they're leaning. The tricky part, though, Mr. Raman, is with newspapers, it's far more difficult to tell that they're leaning at all because they're able to do it in a little more subtle way. So you can bury stories in at the bottom of page 3 when no one will find it. It has been proven that if you, for example, if this is your newspaper, if I put a story somewhere here in page 2, almost nobody reads it because it's really difficult to do. So the eye goes in page 1 and then you read page 3. So where you put the story, how much space you give to it, how you write your headline, how leading or tilting the headline is, all of that also matters. But it's it's far more difficult to pick it out in newspapers than it is in television. Hatem says, unfortunately, Indian primetime media is mostly opinion and debate shows and less action news. I agree with you. Additional investigative reporting is almost non-existent. I agree with you there. Why has Indian media moved in this direction? Oh dear, I just spent the better part of 40 minutes explaining that. Basically, everybody's going after TRPs because the model makes them do so, and that is why there is no investigative journalism and there's less news. What I've begun doing as an experiment on YouTube and on Facebook and Instagram every night, I put out 15 minutes of just the news, really old school style. It seems to be fairly well received. The idea is to grow that into a product where people actually get the news like they used to. Anjali Ravikumar has said, do you think India today has sold out to the current dispensation? That depends. Do you mean India today as a brand, or you mean India today as in the country at this point in time? Because I know you're trying to trap me in a difficult question. The magazine. All right. Okay. So I think it's important to look at these organizations, step back and look at these organizations as a whole, right? So there is a magazine, there are several television channels, including Aaj Tak and India Today, which is the television channel. So look at what they're all doing. And if you just plainly look at Aaj Tak, it's fairly obvious which way Aaj Tak is leaning. And there are pockets of India Today, the channel, that sort of attempt to balance, but are not balancing as very well right now. India Today, the magazine, has some of its, again, like I said, some of its headlines have been worrying. They continue to write some excellent stories. But if, again, you step out and look at the entire network, there are some very worrying pockets in that network. So it's difficult to tell, but the money swirls from all products. So if the network includes an Aaj Tak, which it does, I would be worried about taking it seriously. How do I find the channel Beyond, says Ramakant Shetty. So now I'm just like reviewing other journalists, which puts me in a very difficult position. Beyond, I don't know how many of you know, is owned by the Z Group, the same group that does Z. So having said that, I like their style, but they're also, I mean, if some of the content that they have done on China, some of the content that they have done on Pakistan, for example, is not very journalistic and tends to be a little more, angry, angry dinner table conversation, which I find worrying. That language is not great. I must also tell you this, because I was in these networks for so long. There's qualitative research actually done on the ground, where they do surveys and send people out to find out how many people in each city believe a certain thing. So I go out, for example, and ask you, do you think Narendra Modi is the best prime minister in this country on a scale of, say, 1 to 5? Do you think the Ram Mandir should be built? Is that a good thing? 1 to 5. So do you think that CAA is a good thing? Do you think the abrogation of 370 in Kashmir is a good thing? So they'll get a point of view. And from that point of view, it's actually brought back into the office, and a presentation is made to the people who run these channels, and they're told that if you do content that coincides with what the larger portion of the population actually believes, they will watch you and you will have a larger opportunity for TRPs. So it actually doesn't matter what has really happened. What they're doing is putting out content that you agree with. And their assumption is, if you've already made up your mind about something, and if I put out content that sort of confirms what you already believe, you're more likely to watch me than to watch a TV channel that puts out content that goes against what you believe. So coming back to the question of what I think of Beyond, either you are someone who hates a certain group of people in this country, so I'll put out content that sort of confirms that they're all bad people, or you are someone who thinks that everyone in China is horrible, so then I'll keep putting out content that sort of confirms that. So it's important to look at your television channel and try and figure out what they're trying to feed you, and you'll see a pattern, and then you'll be able to tell. Sudhakar, are you being utopian in your views? Is there an example anywhere in the world where independent journalism is a success? My God. Sorry, I was getting a call. Is there an example anywhere in the world where independent journalism is a success? Okay, so there are examples. Huffington Post, for example, did really well. There are many examples of independent journalism right now overseas that are doing well. And also I wouldn't say utopian, I'm being idealistic. I want to believe that we cannot afford to have a system where there is no independent journalism, because your democracy depends on it. Our democracy depends on it. You cannot have a democratic system without a strong and a free media. I mean, it'll be like if you were tied up in your home and the lights were out, but you could hear someone was robbing you. That is what a democracy without journalism would be like. What journalism does is turns on the light, so you can see who is robbing you. And you cannot have a democracy where you are not adequately fully informed, because it takes away your right to make a decision in the voting booth, whether it is city, state, or center. That is the strongest power a citizen has in a democracy. And if you're not adequately informed, then your powers mean nothing. Also, on a daily basis, if your rights are being eroded and you're not being informed about it, there'll be nothing you can do before it's too late. And so, to even imagine a world where independent journalism doesn't exist, where all we have are these news channels that are putting on tamashas every night, pretending to be news, where actually playing into the hands of somebody else, is a very scary prospect for me. Because that would render the citizen completely helpless in a democracy, whereas the citizen is the most powerful part of the democracy. That would then lead us to a point where our fundamental rights are being eroded and we don't even know. That for me is really, really scary. So maybe my idea that independent journalism can survive is utopian and idealistic, but I'd rather hang on to that than hand over the country to a system that, where the democracy has been weakened in that way. Anjali Ravi Kumar, do you have people hesitating to speak on your show because they're worried about sharing their views on a public platform? 100%, yes. Over the last 2 years, specifically, the number of people who speak openly has dwindled a great deal. Many of the professors of economics that I would speak to when I was on television have moved out of the country and are now teaching in American universities and no longer live in India because they were outspoken and it didn't work out for them. We've just seen it play out again with Ashoka University and Pratap Banu Mehta and Arvind Subramanian. It played out one more time. There are, a lot of times when things happen, I have very, very senior, mostly we speak to retired people from government, people who retired from election commission, people who've retired from police, people who've retired from bureaucracy, are less willing to speak openly today than they were 3 years ago or even 2 years ago. The thing that the situation is drastically different. I had a conversation about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago. I called someone who was very senior in the election commission and was known to be really tough when he was in the election commission. And I asked for a conversation about the ongoing elections. And he refused. He said, dude, I don't want to because you will ask questions and then I will wind up upsetting people who I really don't want to upset anyone. I just want to live a peaceful life. And so a lot of people now have resorted to living peaceful lives and not speaking up. So it becomes more and more difficult to find people who will speak up about certain issues, or they'll say, hey, can you not call me? I'm staying away from it. I'm avoiding it. A lot of that is happening. So yes, I find people hesitating to speak on the show. Also because I do this thing where I don't give people the questions beforehand. And so I don't listen when someone says, don't ask me this, I won't answer that, unless the matter is sub judice in court, in which case asking a person that question actually jeopardizes their case in court, which is not a fair thing. It's not the right thing to do. It's the court is still deciding on that matter. So I don't ask those questions, but otherwise I don't give interviewees the questions beforehand, and that makes them even more uncomfortable. So I have fewer and fewer people speaking to me. Also, I'm being told that I've been banned as persona non grata by some political parties, and they've put out mandates that no member of that political party is to speak to me. So that's the other group of people who don't talk to me on my show.
Hey, before you take more questions, let me request the general body to extend the meeting by another 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Is that all right? Sure.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Who amongst the current journalists agree with this utopian view, Samir Gupta? I do for sure. I know that a lot of, so I'm also part of an association of digital journalists at this point. We're all idealistic. We get trolled on a regular basis. We get threatened on a regular basis. our parents and our family members ask us to give it up on a regular basis, saying, can you please do something else? Is there anything else you can do for a living which doesn't involve the fear of you being attacked? But I have no other marketable skills. I have discovered there is nothing else I can do. So this is what I continue to do. So actually, the other thing I'd want everybody to remember is that it's very easy to call someone who's asking questions anti-national, but journalists who are doing their work at this point are doing it at great personal risk, of their family members, invariably a lot of times without getting paid a lot of money, but they're doing it because it's a calling more than a job. I mean, for many of us, it's not a job anymore, it doesn't pay us, but it's a calling, and there's something inside that just tells us that if we let go, I mean, it'll slip away, and that's something we don't want to happen. I'll take one last question and then we'll stop. Hatim says a lot of our news channels are full of several banners and multi-items at the same time. In this is a poor style or a purpose is distraction of viewers for key news items. I had to ask this because I've not seen it anywhere else in the world. Okay, I'll give you a quick idea of why this happens. So everything you see on a television screen is a tactic. Everything, nothing is there by accident. Every corner is filled with some moving part as a tactic. So if you and I were sitting at a table chatting across, say, a dinner table or a work table, you'd actually be able to, and this is a good way to do it, you'd actually be able to see me up to here, right? Which is, we call this in television a 3-button frame, because you can see button number 1, 2, and 3. It's called a 3-button frame, which means we're sitting at a comfortable distance. I'm leaning back, we're having a decent conversation like grown-ups. It's a calm conversation. But if I were to zoom the shot in and only frame up to here, which is 1 button and the knot of my tie, it would seem like this, right? So it seems like the anchor has leaned into you over here and is telling you something that's really important. This is really important. It's really leaning all the way, and I'm, getting really, like, the body language is leaning forward. It's really like this. It's very frowny. It's to add stress to the broadcast and to make you feel like what is being said is really important. So if you consider the different ways in which you consume content, we don't do it anymore, but when you used to go to a movie theater, you've committed 3 hours to that process. You switch off your phone, you buy a ticket, you pay for parking, you buy popcorn, you sit down in the dark. And now you are watching this and nobody's distracting you. But when you're watching something on your phone, it's a personal thing. So you've got your headphones in, you're watching it like this. Something may or may not distract you. But when you're watching television, it's a family thing, because you tend to do it in a room where other people are also present. So your dog is barking, the maid is asking you, what do you want? Do you want tea? Do you not want tea? The doorbell is ringing, your phone is ringing, somebody else is yelling at you. All of these things are distractions, plus all of the other channels you can watch at the same time. So what news channels do is build a false sense of urgency, telling you that what they're saying is super urgent. So effectively, it's this. Listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. What I'm saying is important. What I'm saying is important. What I'm saying is important. Listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. This is what it's doing. So the bottom is constantly breaking, constantly. I mean, how can you have breaking news all the time? I know that one of the tactics they use is to pick up all the news that was broken at 4 o'clock and bring it again at 6 o'clock, and bring it again at 7 o'clock, because they know that you've not stayed for 3 hours. You've come in for a few minutes. Oh my God, this is broken. And then you left. So the whole screen is moving constantly to give you a sense that something important is happening. And I know this for sure because I tried it. We tried to run a clean screen and your viewership drops immediately as soon as you run a clean screen, because the Indian audience is now tuned to think that if the screen is not what they call dynamic, then nothing important is happening. So then I can go watch something fun. I will only watch this if it seems like the sky is falling. And so there's this constant need to make you think the sky is falling to hold your attention, because TRPs is measured by someone who has come in and by how long they stayed. So it's called time spent, viewership plus time spent. So the idea is to get you, to keep you for as long as possible, which in television is the average is about 2 or 3 minutes is how long a viewer stays. So to keep you as long as possible, they keep the screen moving, the anchor is agitated, reporters are agitated, they're moving for no reason. This whole, reporters walking around backwards for no reason, completely unnecessary. But they do it to add stress to the news that they're delivering, and they add stress to keep you interested. Also, I personally believe it's extremely unhealthy for everyone involved, including the viewer, to add that much stress to anybody. So that I'm hoping that that will not last very long. So I'll take that as the last question, because I think otherwise we'd go on for a while. Mr. Narasimha?
Yes, please tell me.
I have posted a question.
Yeah.
I've posted a couple of
Okay,
questions.
Shivdev, yeah. Please go ahead, Shivdev.
I've already posted it on the
You've
That will be
posted
the
a
last
question.
question.
Okay. How come sensational stories suddenly disappear from channels? What do you mean by sensational stories?
like the Riya Chakravarti being accused of so and so.
Oh, because it no longer serves a purpose. Shiviji, because I mean, consider it, right? When was the last time you heard one of these guys talk about a toolkit?
Yeah.
That poor girl from Bangalore was arrested, kept in jail in the biting Delhi cold. And they went through her life on a nightly basis saying toolkit, 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 and boom, everybody forgot about it. Because it's only there to serve a purpose. You should also ask yourself, one of the things that happens is 3 or 4 of these channels will have the same story, the same lines, the same stand every night. How is that possible unless they're all receiving instructions from the same person? So they keep stories in the news for as long as it serves their purpose. The Sushant Singh Rajput case served a purpose until the Bihar elections. Let's be honest. After the elections were over, it served no purpose, so they dropped it. The toolkit case served a purpose to distract you from the farmer protests and to distract you from the fact that everybody in the world was noticing the farmer protests. They did it, now they forgot about it. You're distracted, purpose served. So that's why these stories disappear as quickly as they appear.
And what about, is this persecution phenomenon a new occurrence, or did it exist earlier? People hesitating to come on the screen and speak, or you just now mentioned that people suddenly withdrawn all this. So didn't it happen ever earlier?
Not to this extent, sir. I don't think we've ever had a time when people across the board, whether it was in academics, in professional spaces, in private sector, have lost their job for asking questions or raising their voice or writing columns or being critical in any way. We're seeing it happen across educational institutions. We're seeing it happen, across many spaces. So I don't think, I mean, at least in my career as a journalist, which is now I'm in my 17th year as a journalist, I've never seen this happen before. Not to this extent. I mean, we tend to forget what life was like in previous governments. Think back to the Vajpayee government, think back to the Gujarat government, think back to the Devegowda government, 2 terms of the Manmohan Singh government. Remember the criticism of these prime ministers. Remember the cartoons that were drawn of these governments. Remember the UPA government and the sweet hell that the media gave them for their repeated, for the scams and the corruption. I mean, everybody talks about the fact that the UPA government was corrupt, and you found out about that because of journalists who still are journalists today, who asked those questions, who broke those scams, who covered those stories, who stayed on the Anna Hazare protest for days after days, who covered the Nirbhaya case days after days. It was because of journalists that the UPA government fell. So to accuse the same journalists of being anti-national, I think is completely unfair.
Thank you so much, Faye.
In a very pleasant surprise, sir, I saw my dad also join, which is nice. Hi, Dad. Welcome.
Really? Where is he?
Okay.
I met him at Catholic Club once.
His name is Frank D'Souza. He is actually the person who taught me right from wrong. So I'm always very proud to see him join any event that has to do.
Welcome, Mr. Frank D'Souza. Welcome, Madhu. Welcome, Ravi Kumar, members of Ravi Kumar's family, Anjali,
Syriac has also joined.
Rajiv, I saw Syriac sending a comment. Welcome, Syriac. Welcome, Suman Bhayankar. Madhu, Samir's friend, yeah, I think has also joined. So welcome all of you. Hope you really enjoyed and logged in at least half an hour back so that you would have got the essence of all the questions which Faye really answered articulately. So now may I invite Vinay Pai, Lieutenant Vinay Pai, to propose the vote of thanks, please.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to propose and privilege to propose today's vote of thanks. Faye, it's been always a pleasure watching you on television when we saw your balanced coverage. And today it was even greater having an interaction with you where we got this insight into how the media works, the business of the media and the TRPs. So I think all of us really enjoyed this. And as somebody put out that the TRPs of this show are very high, we don't want it to end. But sadly, Rotary has some restrictions on timings. So I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all the very best for your new entrepreneurial journey and independent journalism, which we always hope will thrive in India, and you can carry the flag for that. Thank you very much for all our guests and other members who joined this program, and wishing everyone a very good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Vinay.